is one of those hadith that many scholars will say, لَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ الْعَمَلِ, that this hadith is not to be acted upon. Why? There are a few reasons. I'm sorry? Oh, I agree with what you're saying, that it is a mashaqqa, right? It would definitely cause it would definitely cause difficulty, but is difficulty enough to remove an obligation? Because difficulty is subjective, right? Yeah. Right. So what the scholars did with this hadith is like, okay, well, there are a few problems. Number one, which other hadith do we have that shows the obligation of prayer in congregation? Yes. Not fadila, not virtue, but obligation. We don't have a single hadith. We don't have a single hadith showing the obligation of praying in congregation. So what happens now is you have this hadith, and what can be understood from this hadith of Ibn Maktum? That praying in congregation is what? It's obligatory. Because Ibn Maktum, the other thing that we didn't mention, we didn't talk about, what is unique about Ibn Maktum from amongst the companions? Well, there's a few things, but the thing that is very standout. He was what? He was blind, right? he was blind. So now, imagine you have this situation where the Prophet ﷺ is addressing a blind man and telling the blind man, you have to go and pray in congregation. And you have all of these hadith. You have all of these hadith that talk about what is the virtue of praying in congregation. What hadith do you guys know? 27, 25, bid'ah wa shirin, 22, depending on how you understand it. So you have these different hadith that say it is better for an individual to pray in jama'ah than praying singularly. So if I have a hadith that says that it's better for me to pray in jama'ah, what does that say about the thing that is lesser? Does that mean that this is a sin? No, absolutely not. It shows that in that individual prayer there's what? There's reward, but it's less. That's all. Right? It just means that it is less. Did we yes. Mhm. Mhm. There's a hadith of the munafiqeen where he sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, had I been able to, I would have appointed one of you to lead the prayer, and I would have gone and burned down the houses of the people who takhallafun al-jama'ah, yani those that didn't join the congregational prayer. So, but what do you guys think about that hadith? Sound. Mhm. So they're avoiding praying. So why are these people avoiding praying? Because they're lazy? Well, yeah, it is laziness, but the laziness is connected to something else. They're not believers. In which group of people were not believers? The munafiqeen. So here, most scholars have said this. Most scholars, they said that this hadith applies to the munafiqeen. So yeah. But I'm saying even the Hanabila, do they say that praying in congregation is an obligation? But what about praying in the masjid? It's recommended, right? So and they're the most stringent in that. I don't agree, but alhamdulillah, makes me a weak Hanbali. So here, if you have a hadith now that is apparently going against an encyclopedia of so many other hadith, and you have unique situations, because here we just have part of the story. We just have the question and the answer. And are there other things, and are there other possibilities that are definitely there? Because in addition to being blind, what was another, I would say, another walifa or another an employment that Ibn Maktum had? He was a mu'adhin Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was actually a person who called the people to adhan. Taib, can the mu'adhin not go to work? Right? The mu'adhin has to go to work. The mu'adhin has to go to work. So is it possible that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't telling him in a religious capacity, but he was telling him in a professional capacity? Does that make sense? Right? So if he is obligated to go to work, then, and where would he especially what adhan was he known to give? The fajr. Which fajr adhan? The second one. The second one. Huh? The real one. Yeah, fajr is sadiq. Yeah. So it these surrounding circumstances make it a very real possibility that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him again in a professional capacity, not necessarily a religious one. So going back, we had said that there are circumstances that help us understand a hadith, and there are situations where we're not necessarily would act on those hadith. Um, what was the beginning of the discussion? How did I end up here? Oh, ijma'. Oh, can ijma', can consensus actually abrogate a command of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And we said, no, it's okay. I mean, the side discussions are always beneficial. I just have to remember why I got there. So understanding that ijma' or having consensus, it's not something that can actually abrogate a text. It can't abrogate a saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, that's another weak argument to stand on. Dave, what is another argument that some scholars use? So the first one, which I believe is the strongest, is that it's mawquf. That this was Abu Sa'id al-Khudri who was actually saying this, and this is not something that was prophetic. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't say it. The second one, a second explanation is that this is something that is abrogated. A third explanation, that the initial focus should have been what? In terms of writing, right? Because you're now, writing has starting to be, I won't say popularized. Did they have an official script? Like, did the Arab have an official script that they kind of agreed on? Not at that point. So you have the Lakhmids, which was probably the only Arab dynasty that existed even close to that time. They had a script. The Nabateans had the script. The Yemenis had a script, right? And all of these different scripts, eventually what happened is they actually borrowed a lot from the Nabatean script, and that's what became the final script for them. But when did that become finalized? When did it become codified? And why? What was the big push? The Quran. Right? During the time of Uthman, right? Because you had people like Abu Asud al-Duwali, who was appointed and said that, okay, hey, listen, we need to come up with a system in order to actually codify the Quran. And again, but that's more of a Quran discussion. But saying that, the important thing to understand is, why is that important? Because as the science of writing in Arabic developed, in parallel, what else happened? People now had a codified system where they could actually what? Start recording, and they could start writing. So you had, and I use the term loosely, but you had like a proto-written Arabic that was during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In all of these, you have to understand, like, even written language, all it is an expression of what? Spoken word, right? It's an expression of spoken word, and how that manifests can be different according to different tribes and different places, because they didn't have a unified writing system that had developed up until later, right? That didn't come until later. So now you have this extra tool, you have these things going on. And the third explanation here is, and this is another good one if you believe the hadith to be marfu', if you believe it to be attributable to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this because he wanted to busy the companions more so with the writing of the Quran versus the writing of his sunnah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So after his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have some companions who have their small collections and their small writings. And now the Quran also, when has it been compiled? Which Khalifa? I want you during Abu Bakr. So this is immediately after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and some say a few months after his sallallahu alaihi wasallam's passing. And why the trigger was Ma'rakat Yamama, right? So there was a battle of Yamama. Many of the Qurra, many of those individuals who recited the Quran, Umar radiallahu anhu, he came to Abu Bakr. He's like, hey, listen, we lost all these reciters. We need to what? Like, we need to start recording. We got to do something about this, because if we keep sending our Qurra out, right? In the Qurra at that time, what would happen is, like, those people who were considered to be the most virtuous were the ones who used to recite the Quran, those who used to spend time with the Quran. And where would these people be in the battalions? Or they'd be in the front lines, right? These are like the special forces. These would be the people who actually went forward. And because these were the greater risk takers versus others, if we start losing them, what was going to happen? We would lose you'd lose the text, right? You'd lose the Quran. So at that point, Omar, he came to Abu Bakr and he said to him, hey, listen, this needs to be compiled. Many statements and narrations say that this compilation continued until the end of the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, and some say even into the beginning of the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu. So once the compilation was done, that idea of safety and that the book now is in a form that can be referred back to, this is something that became really important and something for them to rely upon. So now that that was taken care of, what else was happening in the ummah at this time? So now we're entering the Khilafah of Umar. And Umar, what does he do? What is one of the unique things that he does? Huh? So expansion is happening during his era, for sure. Like, so the biggest futuhat, the biggest conquests and the biggest expansions, they happen during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anh. And companions are being sent out, right, because they're generals, and they're being sent out in all these different places. Then after the campaigns are over, what would he order them to do? Outside of campaigns. So during campaigns, he would what? He would send, as you have many, so even like some of the smaller tabi'een. So if we look at like Hassan al-Basri, for example, his meeting with the companions was where? Most of the hadith that he takes and he gets, not from Ali, huh? Most of the hadith that he takes, where does he get them from? He gets them from battles. Right? Why? Because he was fighting alongside who? He was fighting alongside companions. So he would spend time in these campaigns, and this was not strange for the tabi'een. This is not strange for many of the students of the companions, that they would actually spend time in campaigns with the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would spend time with these companions, and they would actually go on these campaigns with them. And it's in those campaigns that they would benefit, and they would learn these ahadith. So now you have a rise of, you have these companions. You have Umar. What he did is, like, after the campaigns were over, he would do what with the Sahaba? Right, he's like, you know, they would write to him. They say, hey, can we continue? Can we set up here? He would say what? He would say, no. You need to what? You need to come back to Medina. You need to come back to Medina. You have to come back to Medina. And what are some of the effects of him, radiallahu anh, bringing all of the companions back to Medina? What is one of the benefits that happened? I'm sorry? So the knowledge now has become bottlenecked into one place. How does that benefit? Right, it becomes extremely difficult to fabricate narrations. It's why? Because now you have, if I hear a hadith in Basra, if I hear a hadith in Kufa, if I hear a hadith in Egypt, how much can I rely on those narrations at this stage? You can't. You'd be like, well, there's nobody here, right? None of the companions are here. Nobody settled here. Like, where did you hear this from? And that filtration system had become bottlenecked in Medina. Right, it becomes very easily verified. And not just that, the Khilafah of Umar, it was the second longest Khilafah. It was the second longest Khilafah. Abu Bakr was 12.5 years. Umar was 10, right? And Uthman was 12.5, right? And then the last 6 were Ali, and the last 6 months were Hassan, radiallahu anhum. So you have this bottleneck that's there. The other thing that happens is, now that you've confined the knowledge there, a lot of the ijma'at, so a lot of the consensus, where is it going to happen? It's going to happen in Medina. Right? It's easy. It's easy to do that because all the scholars are where? Right, they're all Dar al-Hijrah. Yeah, the Prophet made Hijrah from Mecca to Medina, right? The original Dar al-Hijrah, not like Dar al-Hijrah false church. Interestingly enough, side note, I never thought I would graduate from Mecca to become the Imam at Dar al-Hijrah. It's interesting, right? So, so can I be Imam Haramain or? Yeah. So we have here now, during the time of Umar, we have this consensus. We have the scholars, all of them gathered. All of the companions are in there, and you have the younger companions. Who are they spending time with? Spending time with the older companions. 2 very famous ones come to mind, that they become from the Mukaththireen as-Sab'a. They become from the 7 great narrators of the prophetic hadith. Who are they? Abdullah ibn Umar and Abdullah ibn Abbas. Young. Both of these guys are young. And not just that, from them, there's another companion, but he narrates hadith because the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. Who is that? He was also young, and he only spent a handful of years. Yeah. Abu Hurairah. So Abu Hurairah, when did he become Muslim, and when did he start hearing from the Prophet ﷺ? Ghazwat Khaybar, right? Like Khaybar. And Khaybar was like 2-3 years before the Prophet ﷺ passed. But saying that, you have the younger companions now. Ibn Umar, he's raised in Medina. Medina is a city of companions, right? If I wanted to learn anything at that era, of the Islamic Empire, I would go where? I would go to Hijrah. I would go to Al-Hijrah. I would go to Mecca. I mean, I'm sorry. I would go to Medina because that's where the companions were. Were there companions in Mecca still? Yeah, there were still companions in Mecca. You had I think who moved to Taif? One of the companions moved to Taif, but they all stayed within the area, right? They didn't go too far. Most of the companions had settled in Medina by that point. So here you have a hadith coming out from that space, and you have coming out from that area, and then Umar radiallahu anh, he's assassinated, and then Uthman comes to power. And what does Uthman do that's unique? What does he do that's different than what Umar did? I'm sorry? So he distributed the Quran, because now what had happened is, after all of this expansion, how much expansion happened during Uthman's era, during his Khilafah? There were some, but it was in comparison to other, the expansion was very what? It was very limited, right? It was limited when you compare it to the other expansions that happened. Like it happened, so they moved a little bit into Azerbaijan, they moved a little bit toward the Caspian Sea, and they opened up a little, so they had some more conquests that happened in those areas, but the conquests were nowhere near as large. So now that the conquest stopped, what happens to the soldiers? Right, they kind of stay. And now that you've concentrated the conquests into specific areas, all of those soldiers that were spread out, now they're what? Now they start concentrating into these specific places where you're looking for either conquest, or you're looking for border patrol, or for protection. And because you've focused on these two places, all of these soldiers that had never met before, now they finally have an opportunity to what? To meet. And from those soldiers you have people who are Qurra. From those soldiers you have people who are reciting the Quran. And how did they learn their recitation? From different companions, right? Because remember, we were talking about they were on different campaigns. So usually on a campaign they would accompany one or two companions in that entire campaign, moving in this direction, moving in this direction, moving in this direction. And then what happened during the Khilafah of Uthman is now they're starting to come together. And now that they are reciting in different ways, what's happening? Right, there's differences, and all of us immediately with differences. How do we deal with differences? Do we do a good job as Muslims? Right, in general, we don't do a good job. And if I say, okay, well, the way that I recite is what? That's the right way, right? That's the best way to do it. And this guy is like, nah, I learned it this way. I heard this from Ibn Mas'ud, and this person's like, no, I heard this way from Ibn Abbas, and they're reciting Quran in their particular, or I heard this from Ali. So they have their recitations, and they're saying, okay, no, this is my mustanad, this is how I learned it, this is the right way to do it. So what happens is now Uthman, he gets word of this. He's like, man, the Qurra are fighting. The Qurra are fighting, and so what does he do? He's like, okay, no, we need one system now. And he does something that he codifies the Quran. He says, no, this is the final Mus'haf, and it's known as Mus'haf al-Imam, and he sends it out to the different Amsar, right? So most scholars will say that he sent it out to 5 different provinces, and he said, this is what we're going to read. This is how we're going to continue going. This is how we're going to read. At the same time, what else is happening in the Ummah? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So it can be argued that Abu Bakr's preservation was not a state-imposed preservation. It was closer to a spiritual, personal type preservation, because he didn't impose that on anyone. Versus Uthman, he was like, and what was the reason he was doing it? He wanted to get rid of the infighting. And he was like, okay, we're just going to come on one system now. And once it became codified, why were the other masahif ordered to be burnt? For that purpose. That's all. And Allah knows best. So, at the same time, what else is happening in the Muslim Empire? We have something new during the era of Uthman that we didn't have to deal with in the era of Umar. The Khawarij, okay. Were they there during the Khilafah of Umar? They were under thumbs, right? They were being held back and held down. During the era of Uthman, these individuals and these groups, they started what? They started rising, and they started making an appearance. The most famous of them, the Khawarij. Who else? The Shia, right? The Shia also rose in this time period. So now that you have the rise of these different sects, what other problem is being introduced? Because there's something else that happened too. You had the rise of sects and sectarianism. What else happened? So we said these battles happen. He was like, he's trying to quell all these fires, right? That's what Uthman was trying to do. He was trying to put out all these fires. But he had one additional problem. So during the era of Umar, we said, where were the companions? They were in Dar al-Hijrah. They were in Medina. And during the Khilafah of Uthman, what happened to the companions? They started spreading out now. They're like, okay, well, if we don't have to stay, we're going to go on these campaigns. And we're going to go give da'wah, and we're going to go teach, and we're going to go set up centers. So now the knowledge is no longer confined to one place. Saying that, this is just human nature, where did most of the companions go? So if we have like 100% of the companions, they start, or even 98% of the companions started in Medina, what percentage of them do you think left? Huh? Yeah, maybe like half of them, right? Meaning that this remaining half, where did they go? They went to all of the different provinces. So if we're spreading that 50% off into the different provinces, where are most of the companions? They're still in Medina. They're still in Medina. Which is why when we got into the science of actually criticizing narrators and doing all these things, it didn't start in Medina. Why? Because people were known, right? You still had like grandkids of companions around, and not to say like the righteousness is inherited. That's not the purpose, and that's not the point. But you still had companions around, right? You still had companions around, and they were the ones who were walking in the streets. It wasn't like other places where you only had like a handful. You actually had a good number of companions that stayed in Medina, and because you had so many, it's much more difficult to do what in Medina than it would be in other places. To fabricate. Why? Because immediately what would happen? They shut you down. They'll immediately shut you down. No, he didn't say that. And not just that, like such people, would they be able to thrive in such an environment? No, absolutely not. Which is why you don't have a lot of hadith criticism happening in Medina. You don't have a lot of narrator criticism happening in Medina, because the ability for them to even do that was very limited. It was very problematic. So you have that going on. You have companions in other places. You have sectarianism happening. And now this gives rise to what? Okay, it gives rise to these sciences that we're talking about. Right, we have to respond to these problems. But what problem has arisen that we didn't have to deal with previously? Fabrication. Ahsant. Because now you have people fabricating hadith. Why are they fabricating? Because either for political motives or for well, to make money wasn't a problem, but what other one? For status, right? So that can go back to political, or there are two ways to gain status. I can either gain status politically or what? Scholarly, religious status. So these were mainly the two reasons why people would do that. So religiously, either because I'm misusing the deen, which is one possibility, or I actually what? Because not everybody was ill-willed. Not everybody was doing it purposely. Out of encouragement, yeah, those people existed too. No, you're right. But I'm talking about like the like a Khariji or a Shi'i or Qadari or Murji. Why would they do that? Because they believe what? They believe that this is right. They believe that this is right. So it's not necessary that they fabricated a hadith, but is it possible that they would take a hadith and they would misrepresent it or misconstrue it without realizing that they're doing it because they believe this is the right way to understand and the right way to project? Right, they misunderstood. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have like, and this is what happens, right? You have people where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't given them tawfiq. He hasn't blessed them in understanding, a particular thing in the right way. But if this individual, as a Muslim, he believes this is right, how is he going to represent the hadith? He's going to push his agenda, right? He's going to have his bias that's in there. And then this is something that is going to be natural, even for the person who's even if he's sincere. And how do we know that some of these people were sincere? Sometimes they would narrate hadith that were what? They were contrary to what they believed. Just think about that. It just shows how sincere and honest many of these narrators were. That they were willing to narrate hadith that were actually contradictory to what they believed. How did they deal with those hadith? They would do ta'wil, or they would try to explain it away, or they would interpret it in a different way. But at the end of the day, they were willing to do that. Why? Because they didn't want to be known, and they didn't want to lie on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are all the things that are happening. You have the rise of the tabi'een, right? Because now we're moving, as we move further in time, the companions are what? Not just spreading out. There's something else. They're dying, right? They're passing away. They're all dying. They're passing away, and the next generation is starting to inherit. And we said that in the next generation, in the tabi'een, we split them into 3 categories. What are the 3 major categories of the tabi'een? So either all or a majority of their teachers were companions. Okay, and on the other end, right, they would just have 1 or 2 who were their teachers, and then we had who. There's only there has to be in the middle, right? It's like either all or one, right? So these are the 3 levels, right? So kibar tabi'in, awsat tabi'in, and sigar tabi'in, right? And these are all the levels of the tabi'in, and this is how they recorded, and this is how they carried it forward. And we said at the same time, like now they're starting to do what? By them sitting with the companions, what are they sitting and what are they learning? Right, they're learning about narration, right? They're taking statements of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes a companion would also give what? He would give his own ijtihad, he would give his own fatwa, and what were they doing? They were recording, right? Either through memory or they would be writing it down, right? These are the only 2 ways that they would actually record. And by doing this, they would record, they would write it down, and you have the rise of suhuf, right? So you have the rise of these small booklets that had started, right? You have Sahiha and a few other booklets that were recorded by, like, what were some of the ones that we mentioned last time? were the early ones? Here, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, Abi Salama Nabit ibn al-Sharit al-Kufi, and Hammam ibn Munabbih. These are the 3 earliest compilations that we actually have. And you start having these compilations where you have the tabi'een recording from some of the companions. What happens to these books? Or what happened to these books? Right. These actually became incorporated into larger books. And then we have the next era, which is the golden age of compilation. So what do you think the golden age of compilation is? What do you think we're going to find in this era, in this time? I'm sorry? Can you ask about what? Chad Chu? I have no idea what you're saying. Oh, can you ask AI? I mean, yeah. I mean, listen, you can ask whatever you want. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. His Muwatta. His Muwatta was very early because Imam Malik, he died 189, right? So you're talking about even if he did it like 20, 30 years before he died. Yeah. So the golden age now, they're a little bit later because like Imam Malik, he died before all of them, right? He was very early. But after that, like you're talking about maybe like 70, 80 years after them, then you have these scholars. And who are these scholars during this golden age? Very famously, Muhammad ibn Ismail, ibn Mughira, ibn al-Bardizbah, al-Bukhari. And where are these scholars from? You'll find them from all different parts of the Muslim Ummah. And what's really interesting is that we see this happening, right? We see this happening where we have scholars from who are not Arab now taking on positions of imama, right? Like these are actually imams and considered religious figureheads in Islam. And this is like, for somebody who studies history or spends time looking at other religions, this is like really, it's like game changing. This is such a big thing. Even today, amongst the Muslims, do you have one central Muslim authority? No. For some people, right? No, no, which is fine. But I'm saying you have an authority that will be respected by those people. But how will other people view that authority? Right? They'll respect it, but they're going to be like, I don't need to. Right? Or they might not. Right? But I don't need to listen to that. So even today, there you have in Indonesia, you have two major Muslim groups. Like you have Nadwat Ulama and you have someone else. In Pakistan, you have Dar al-Ulum. The Khalij, the Gulf, they've kind of split now, right? With Qatar and Saudi. But they have their own marja. Even in Iran, right? They're Muslim. Like granted, they're not Sunni, but they have their own. Even amongst them, you have the Usulis and the Akhbaris. So even they don't agree on that. And if we say, oh no, it's a madhab thing, no, the Hanafis in the Indo-Pak region are very different from the Hanafis in the Syrian region. So you have all of these different authoritative groups, right? Not in the sense that they impose on others, but in the sense that they're recognized. And they're all from different regions. Yes. Oh, is it appropriate for? Yeah. I mean, okay, like Islam came to bring nizam, right? Islam came to bring regiment. It came to bring order. So to have like these organized institutions is something that's really important. Without organization, there's no way to move forward. But is it something that is necessary for me as an individual to abide to? Like, because none of these are political bodies. They're what? They're religious ones, right? They're religious bodies. So even here in the United States, you have like 2 or 3 major religious bodies. Are you guys familiar? Well, there might even be more. I'm not familiar with all of them, honestly. Like, so ISNA is more of like a Muslim social platform than it is like a religious authoritative one. Like fiqh councils, right? So you have AMJA, you have was it North American Fiqh Council is another one. I think Darul Uloom, they have their own fiqh councils. But these, other than these like major like 3, 4, I'm sure there are more than this. At the end of the day, if AMJA, and let's just use that as an example, they say, okay, concerning this issue, we don't think it's permissible. Do I have to abide by that ruling as an individual? No, I don't. I'm sorry? So I think a lot of the Arab American Muslims do. Outside of that, no, not really. Yeah. No, not even less, right? Because Arabs in general, what percentage of the Muslim population are they? It's like 17%. But even in America, it's like mostly Egyptian, right? Like most of the Arab representation are Egyptian. Yeah, but it's small, right? It's not that big. Saying that, like you have all kinds, and not just that, like within the Black Americans, they have their own institutions. Even amongst the immigrants, like you have splits amongst them about who they recognize, who their own institutions are. Some of them don't even recognize any of the American institutions, and they still rely on a lot of their foreign institutions that they were either a part of or they associate themselves with. So, again, these are not authoritative bodies. These are religious bodies that exist that are meant to give irshad, they're meant to give guidance, they're meant to give like direction, they're meant to give insight into certain things. But as an individual Muslim, am I obligated to follow this body or that body or this consent? No, that's not necessarily. Should I benefit and respect them? Yes, absolutely. And they're doing work that we're not doing, right? They're doing work that, whether I agree with it or not, as long as they have a methodology in place that's very clear, then it's something that we should definitely respect. So here you have a lot of Muslims from these different parts of the Muslim world now who are coming together and they're writing Hadith. Bukhara, Qurtuba and Ishbiliya. You guys know where these places are? They're in Spain. Sana'a and Aden, where is that? In Yemen, and Makkah and Medina, obviously, the well-known. And in this era, you have different types of compilation happening. So companion-based, do you guys know what kind of hadith those are called, or what compilations those are? These are called Masanid, right? So this is called Musnad. So if you look, for example, what is the most famous Musnad? Imam Ahmad. Yeah. So Musnad Imam Ahmad, right? Musnad Imam Ahmad, how does he organize it? He organizes it by companions, right? He organizes by companion, meaning which hadith did that particular companion narrate. Also, you have topic-based hadith. What do we mean by topic-based hadith? Yeah. So halal, haram, even more. Like even, yes. So like marriage, prayer, fasting. So like these different topics, what would happen is that you'd actually have either entire compilations. The most famous, even during the time of Imam Ahmad, you have the Musannafat, right? So you have Musannaf Abd Razak, Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, you have Al-Awsat Ibn Mundhir. So these are all very famous hadith books that were compiled during the time. The problem with those works is they're extremely what? They're really large. They're really long. But if you compare them, for example, to Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or Sunan Abi Dawud or Ibn Majah, those are much shorter works comparatively. Why? Okay, yes, but what was sifted? So the earlier works, like during the time of Imam Ahmad, you have like these musannafat, you have like these really, really long topic-based works. And even a lot of those books, what happens was like those, sometimes the chapter headings even. So you'd have chapter headings in hadith, they'd be pulled and they'd be brought into the next generation book. So the question is like, okay, what happened here? There was a sifting that happened, which I agree with, but what kind of sifting happened? What was unique in the following generation? What happened? There are two layers to it. I'm sorry? They removed repetition? So that's actually a really good guess, but no. I'm sorry. Strength. So now you have the first two famous books that we're aware of. They put a condition of what? That it be sahih, right? That it be sahih. So this was for one type of sifting. What else happened? They all had chains, even in the previous generations. The chains had already been introduced. So the difference between the Musannafat and even in the Muwatta, let's even bring Muwatta into this. What is different from the Muwatta than from the books that come later? What is different from the Musannafat from the books that come later? Ahsant. So in the Musannafat, you don't just find hadith. You find what else? You find sayings from the companions. You find fatawa, right? Even from some scholars. Like they're much more encyclopedic in their scope. Because even if you look at the Muwatta of Imam Malik, it's not all what? It's not all a hadith, right? He'll bring some statements. He'll give sometimes he'll give his own what? Fatawa. But when we when you enter the next era and the next stage, they brought only authenticity. And what else did they bring? Only hadith. Like they said, we are only going to focus on what he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. And that's what was unique in the following generations. Yes. So yeah. Uh-huh. That wasn't their goal. Yeah. So Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, their goal was actually authenticity. That was their goal. And they had said that out. Why? So for Imam Bukhari, when we'll get to it, he was actually requested by one of his teachers, say that had you gathered all of the authentic statements on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was asking him to do two things. And he said this. And Imam Muslim in his Muqaddimah, what is one of the goals? That he's like, I only want to bring what? Sahih. Yeah. So we can talk about those too. So Imam at-Tirmidhi, that was not his goal. Right? He makes that clear when he does his hukum on the hadith itself. Right, so sometimes it's clear, like, okay, well, he doesn't even think this hadith is sound. Nasa'i and Abu Dawud are a little bit more challenging. Abu Dawud, he writes in his letter to the people of Mecca, فَمَا سَكَتْتُ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ صَالِحٌ. So it's like, whatever I'm silent about, then that hadith is salih. Now, what does he mean by salih? Does he mean salih ihtijaj or i'tibar? Does it mean that this can be used as a standalone proof in and of itself, or is it something that can be used as a supporting proof? Debatable. And then Ibn Majah, one of my professors actually pointed me to I think it was the PhD thesis on Ibn Majah. Like it was called Ibn Majah wa Manhaju. Like Ibn Majah and his methodology in his compilation. And he said that one of the titles he found for Ibn Majah was As-Sunan wal-Gharaib. that sunan and unique ahadith. So you'll find that just by having that title, it changes your entire perception on how to deal with the book. Because his goal was also not to do what? To bring everything that's sahih. He actually, he purposely does what? Brings ahadith that are unique. Right? And not meant to be, because uniqueness is one of the first steps toward what? Toward weakness. Toward weakness. Khalas, there's only a couple minutes till Salah. I'm sorry, we don't have time for questions. If you have any, just write them down, inshallah, and I'll take them next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Also, if you guys haven't had a chance to take a survey, please take the survey. I would really appreciate it. It helps me develop new classes, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But we do have 2 classes, inshallah, that will be starting at the beginning of the year that I'm pretty sure you guys will be excited about. Yeah. No, it was one is confirmed. The second one we're working on.